I will honestly say I don't remember ever speaking a word to Esther the whole time she was there. We were never friends. We never spoke to each other, only on the set.
Jimmie Walker once made America go wild with just one line dynamite. That skinny black man was once the soul of Good Times, the sitcom that paved the way for generations of black actors to come. He was the symbol of joy, the face of an era when television could still make people laugh and believe that everything would be all right. Then he disappeared. No scandal, no obituary, no explanation, just gone. He was nowhere to be seen at award shows. No more talk shows, no more films. Only rumors that he lived in seclusion, that he had grown frail, that he had nothing left but the past. Then one day they found that mansion, not on Hollywood Boulevard, no nameplate, no lights, no iron gate or guard. Just an ordinary house, but inside everything was far from ordinary. Old photographs, unsent letters, dusty keepsakes, every detail told a story completely different from the Jimmie Walker the world thought it knew. That mansion didn't just hold belongings, it held the truth. And when the door finally opened, all of Hollywood held its breath. What did they find inside Jimmie Walker's house? And why is everyone still in shock? Back to the Bronx, where it all began. Before the laughter, before dynamite, and before America ever knew his name. The childhood of an unknown boy. It was the Bronx, in the late 1950s. A gray slum filled with the sounds of car horns shouting and the weary sighs of people just trying to survive another day. Amid all that chaos was a skinny, dark-skinned boy with sharp, curious eyes, James Carter Walker Jr., born on June 25, 1947 in Brooklyn, but raised in the Bronx. Walker didn't have the glittering start that the stage lights would one day shine on him. His family wasn't well off. He rarely spoke about his parents, but one thing was clear. He grew up feeling like he had to fight the world on his own. No one held his hand. No one made promises. As a teenager, Jimmie didn't choose fighting or wandering the streets. He got a part-time job at Yankee Stadium, not to cheer for the team, but to sell food and scrape together a few coins for himself. A teenage boy standing among thousands of screaming fans, but with only one thought in his mind: how do I get out of here? And surprisingly, he did. But not through sports, not through violence, but through a microphone. Walker joined the SEEK program, an educational initiative by the state of New York for underprivileged black students where he studied radio engineering. While his peers were still trying to figure out what to do with their lives, Jimmie was learning to handle sound-adjust frequencies and build radio programs. But that was only the beginning. What truly changed his life happened when he started making people laugh. It began with small jokes among classmates. Once during a technical class, Walker mimicked his professor's voice, and the whole class burst into laughter. A girl turned to him and said, "You should do comedy. You're really good at it." That remark meant as a joke turned out to be a prophecy. In 1969, Jimmie stepped onto the stage for the first time at a small comedy club in New York. He didn't perform like Richard Pryor. He wasn't as fast as George Carlin. He wasn't as loud as Red Fox. But he had something that drew people in sharp-wit self-awareness and pure authenticity. He didn't tell fantasy stories. He talked about the Bronx, about the slums, about what it was like to survive when the whole world thought you were nothing. The audience laughed, loudly, endlessly. For the first time in his life, Jimmie Walker saw a different kind of light, not the streetlights of the Bronx, but the lights of the stage. But the most remarkable thing about that time wasn't that his career was beginning to rise. It was that Jimmie stood firm while everything around him was collapsing. In the Bronx, drugs were like an unofficial family member in every household. Neighbors used them, classmates used them, even relatives used them. But Walker, even while performing in clubs filled with booze and temptation, even after long, exhausting nights on stage, never touched any substance. No drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. I saw my own relatives fall apart because of the white stuff. I learned to say no by watching them say yes, Walker later shared in an interview. That decision might have seemed small, but it was the only reason he managed to stay grounded in a world full of traps, the New York comedy scene of the late 60s, where fame and downfall walked hand in hand, and a single moment of weakness could bury an entire career. And Jimmie never faltered. He kept performing. From small bars in Harlem to bigger stages in Manhattan. One night during what seemed like an ordinary show, a middle-aged man sat quietly in the back. watching. He didn't laugh loudly or clap much, but after the show he approached Walker and said, "I'm casting for a new sitcom. You should audition." Jimmie almost laughed. A sitcom television. He wasn't an actor, just a guy telling jokes on a damp stage for a few bucks. But the man wasn't joking. And a few weeks later, Walker was invited to audition for a show called Good Times. From a boy in the Bronx slums working at Yankee Stadium, resisting every temptation, and standing tall with confidence, he was now about to step into a completely new world. The world of national television. The world of fame. The world that would know him by just 3 words, Dino-Mite. And everything was only just beginning. Becoming the man who made America go wild. In 1974, a 26-year-old man walked into a CBS studio to play a 17-year-old boy. No one believed he would fit the part. He was lanky, thin as a reed, his hair a messy afro, his eyes always shining yet full of doubt. He hadn't studied acting, held no drama degree, had no connections. All he had was instinct and a rare gift, the ability to make people laugh from his very first line. The show was called Good Times, a sitcom with a realistic tone telling the story of a black family living in a Chicago housing project, poor, struggling with injustice, yet resilient and full of love. At first, the series was written around the mother, Florida Evans, played by Esther Roll, focusing on serious topics like unemployment, racism, and education. But everything changed because of one side character with a mouth that never stopped J.J. Evans. Jimmie Walker, the former Yankee Stadium worker, the man who once stood in smoke-filled comedy clubs, was now entering millions of American living rooms every Thursday night. And within just a few episodes, he wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a phenomenon. All it took was one line, 3 syllables, a lightning strike delivery, Dino-Mite. That catchphrase wasn't even Walker's idea. It came from director John Rich, who wanted to turn JJ into a strategic comic relief to attract younger audiences. At first, Walker resisted. He thought it was silly. Norman Lear, the legendary producer behind many classic sitcoms, was skeptical too. But once the audience laughter filled the studio, and letters started pouring in, asking the network to let JJ say Dino-Mite more often, nothing could stop it. That line appeared in every episode. On t-shirts, in children's toys, on bar signs. It became pop culture. All of America, young and old, black and white, knew J.J. Evans, and Jimmie Walker was J.J. It gave him everything an unknown actor could dream of. He was nominated for 2 consecutive Golden Globes, 1975-1976, for the role. He appeared in commercials for Panasonic shouting Dino-Mite into the camera, while pressing a cassette player. He was invited onto The Tonight Show Match Game Hollywood Squares. He even released his first comedy album, Yes, called Dino-Mite. The name Jimmie Walker became a brand, a label stuck to easy laughter, charming silliness, and the image of the funny black kid who never stayed serious for too long. But beneath the stage lights, between the TV appearances, was a man who started to feel himself disappearing. He once said, "When I walk down the street, people don't call me Jimmie. No one asks what I think. They just want me to yell those 3 words and laugh. I'm not a person anymore. I'm a button you press for entertainment." The problem was, JJ wasn't who he really was. While the on-screen character was lazy, goofy, and lived off slapstick jokes, Jimmie Walker in real life was disciplined, intelligent, and socially aware. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't party, and kept his private life quiet. But the character had grown beyond his control, and Jimmie was forced to live in its shadow. He recalled in an interview, "I walked into the casting as an artist, but when I walked out, I was an icon. And icons aren't allowed to change." Worse still, as Good Times went on, more and more scripts revolved around J.J. Giovre, gradually pushing the rest of the Evans family into the background. The serious social themes were replaced with simple comic sketches, and that not only divided audiences, it quietly fractured the cast. Esther Rolla, who played the mother, didn't hide her disappointment. She told the press bluntly, "We didn't make this show to turn a young black man into a clown." John Amos, who played the father, also criticized publicly. "This show was meant to inspire. Now it's just shouting and monkey business." And standing in the middle of that storm was Jimmie Walker, a man who never asked to be the center of attention, yet paid the price for being too famous. The more the public adored him, the more isolated he became from his co-stars. The more successful he was as JJ, the fewer chances he had to be anyone else. And the more he shouted dynamite on TV, the more his own life felt like it was exploding silently, slowly, and unheard. 7 years after that first night at CBS, Jimmie Walker had become a national star. But in the brightest moment of his career, the seeds of loneliness and stagnation had already begun to take root. On screen, they were a family, but behind the scenes, it was a war. People often say television is a miracle. Strangers becoming family 20-minute episodes, leaving a lifetime of warmth. Good Times once carried that illusion. On screen, the Evans family was a fortress of unity amid hardship. JJ brought laughter. Thelma offered empathy. Michael was the smart one, James the tough father, and Florida the compassionate mother. But when the director shouted, "Cut," the magic vanished. Behind the scenes, Good Times was no family, no laughter, no hugs, only avoided gazes, cold conversations, and a crack that grew deeper with time. At the center of that fracture was a 3-letter name, JJ Evans. From the start, Esther Roll, who played the mother Florida, was unhappy with how her on-screen son was written. In the beginning, JJ was a funny, witty young man, and that was fine. But over time, the writers exaggerated him into a caricature. He didn't study, didn't work, spoke like a child, danced and yelled, becoming a comic prop instead of a representation of young black men striving to rise in an unjust America. Esther Roll told the press bluntly, "JJ is an 18-year-old with no job, no education, behaving foolishly." This is a degrading image not just for the black community, but for all poor families struggling to raise their children properly. She wasn't criticizing Jimmie Walker. She was criticizing Hollywood's idea of entertainment, which turned a black character into a clown. And she wasn't alone. John Amos, who played the father, also didn't hide his frustration. In one interview, he described how he felt sidelined as family moments were replaced by JJ's ridiculous antics. "I felt the show was losing its soul. It used to reflect real life. Now, it's just cheap laughter." Amos spoke too strongly, too directly, and Hollywood doesn't like people like that. By season 3, he was fired. His character, James Evans Sr., was killed off in a car accident, gone from the series for good. Esther Roll stayed a little longer, but when she saw the writers continue to push JJ into the spotlight, she too walked away in season 5. She only returned after being promised that the mother's role would be treated seriously, and JJ's antics would be toned down. And so in the very sitcom audiences thought was a happy home, Jimmie Walker became the last man standing, alone. Worse than loneliness was indifference. Walker once said that throughout filming, he almost never spoke to Esther Rolla or John Amos. No lunches together, no private rehearsals, no sharing beyond the lines on camera. "We weren't co-stars. We were just people standing near each other in the same frame," Walker said flatly. He didn't complain, but there was quiet pain in his voice. A young man who suddenly became famous, someone who should have been mentored, was left alone on a stage where no one wanted to stand beside him. Norman Lear, the show's producer, once said with regret, "If Esther and John had been a little softer, if they had embraced Jimmie instead of pulling away, I'm certain he would have become a different kind of artist." But they left him alone. That wound never healed. Years later, when Good Times cast reunions were held, Walker rarely showed up. When Esther Roll passed away in 1998, almost the entire cast attended except Jimmie. He didn't go to the funeral, didn't send flowers, didn't make a statement, not a single public word. Many called him heartless, but others understood if a man was never accepted as family, how could he mourn like one? Outwardly, Jimmie Walker kept performing comedy, still shouting dynamite on stage. But deep down, he always knew the moment he became famous was also the moment he lost the people who could have been his real family. The whole world loved JJ, except the ones who shared the screen with him. And that was the cruelest truth. Not being hated, but never being accepted. A life on the road, a fate trapped by the name JJ. When Good Times ended in 1979, most viewers thought it was just a pause in Jimmie Walker's career. That the man who made America erupt with laughter at every grin and shout of dynamite would soon land a movie role, a new sitcom, or at least a serious acting project. But that never happened. Hollywood has a short memory, but the shadow of an icon lasts too long. To most producers, Jimmie Walker was J.J. Evans forever. And that image, though it brought him fame and fortune, was also a prison with no door. Walker tried out for serious roles. He auditioned for dramas, for new sitcoms, for villains, and supporting characters. But no matter what he did, audiences waited for one thing: the shout, "Dynamite!" And when he didn't say it, they were disappointed. When he did, he was disappointed. Unable to find his place in a fast-changing TV world, Walker decided to return to where it all began: the comedy stage. From the early 1980s, he began a new life. No longer a television star, but a traveling stand-up comic, performing in clubs, theaters, casinos, fairs, even college campuses. And he didn't perform just a few shows a month. He toured almost year-round, over 300 days a year. No matter the weather, no matter the distance, his suitcase was always ready. Tonight, Cleveland; tomorrow, Orlando; next week, Las Vegas. A life measured by tour schedules and carry-on bags. Though he no longer played to massive TV audiences, one thing stayed: constant laughter. Walker may have fallen from primetime television, but he never fell out of the hearts of middle-aged fans. Those who had grown up with Good Times laughed with JJ and still wanted to hear that familiar sound again, even if just in a small comedy club. Sometimes younger audiences, those who didn't know who JJ was, came too. They didn't fully grasp his stories about the Bronx in the 60s or how Hollywood boxed in black performers. But they still laughed, because even after 40 years, Jimmie still had his charm. He also accepted guest roles on smaller shows: The Love Boat Fantasy Island, The Drew Carey Show, Everybody Hates Chris. He even starred in the sitcom Bustin' Loose 1987, which was canceled after one season. The problem wasn't the scripts, nor the acting. It was that audiences didn't want Jimmie Walker, they wanted JJ. And when they didn't see JJ, they changed the channel. But then something strange happened. After nearly 30 years on the road living under his own shadow, Jimmie Walker began to accept JJ. Instead of running, he faced it. Instead of rejecting it, he decided to tell its story. In 2012, he released a memoir titled Dynamite, the very phrase that had haunted him for half his life. In it, he wrote about good times, his distant relationship with Esther Roll, the isolation that followed fame, and the countless shows he performed across America, where people remembered him only as the Dynamite guy. The book wasn't just an explanation, it was reconciliation. With himself, with JJ, with his audience, with the past that couldn't be undone. Not stopping there, he even developed a mobile app for fans where users could download the Dynamite sound as a ringtone, share old clips, and read excerpts from his book. A move no one expected from a man who once said, "I hate that nickname," to one who turned it into a digital brand. This wasn't surrender, it was clarity. When you've spent half your life carrying a name, you didn't choose. You either keep running from it or you turn around and make it your own. Jimmie Walker chose the latter. And so the man once trapped by a role finally built his own frame, painted it anew, put his nameplate on it, and sat inside. But this time as its owner, not its prisoner. He spent his life performing, spent his life being the comic relief. But within that repetition, he found a way to survive, to endure, and at last, to tell his own story. The lonely man. They say those who make the world laugh are often the loneliest. In Jimmie Walker's case, that saying wasn't an old proverb, it was a cold living truth. Though once one of television's biggest stars of the 1970s, sitting beside Johnny Carson, hearing America roar Dynamite night after night, Jimmie Walker never married. No children, no wedding, no divorce, no public breakups, no notable romantic scandals in over 50 years of fame. In a rare 2012 interview, when asked why he never married, he answered softly, "I just never saw any reason to. No bitterness, no heartbreak, just indifference." Maybe it was because he'd learned to live alone back in the Bronx. Maybe touring 300 days a year left no space for long-term love. Or maybe after spending a lifetime under the stage lights, he simply learned how to live without any other kind of light. Whatever the reason, Jimmie Walker, once the charming, funny guy everyone adored on screen, was in reality an intensely private and introspective man. He didn't attend entertainment events. avoided celebrity parties, rarely appeared on social media, and never had anyone by his side at premieres, award shows, or red carpets. He didn't use drugs, didn't drink, was never arrested for violence, never involved in any sexual scandal. In short, no stains, but also no footprints of closeness. Then in 2017, an unexpected name appeared beside his Ann Coulter. During an interview, legendary producer Norman Lear casually mentioned that Jimmie Walker was dating Ann Coulter. The room burst into laughter, thinking it was a joke. But the internet didn't laugh, it exploded. Ann Coulter, the outspoken conservative commentator, known for her controversial takes on race immigration, and even her criticism of the very values Good Times once stood for, was now rumored to be dating J.J. Evans. The story spread like wildfire. People were shocked, some angry, some in disbelief, some strangely fascinated. Coulter quickly took to Twitter to clarify, "We're not dating. Never dated. Just close friends, a weird kind of friendship, I guess." Walker, meanwhile, stayed silent. Later in a private interview, he simply said, "Ann and I have known each other a long time. We share the same sense of humor. We can joke about anything without fear of judgment. That's rare." No firm confirmation, no firm denial. But that story, whether true or not, remains the only time in decades that the public has ever heard his name linked with someone else. Beyond that, everything about Jimmie Walker's personal life remains an odd blank space. No one knows who he lives with. No one knows if he still has any family. And no one is sure whether when he leaves the stage at night, anyone waits for him at home. Walker once admitted he's not a people person and not good at making friends. He's comfortable eating alone, reading alone, watching TV alone. But within those calm words, there's something quiet, not painful, but melancholy, gentle, enduring solitude. He once made millions laugh with a glance, a line, a walk. Yet he shares none of that laughter with anyone beyond the stage. At 78, Jimmie Walker still performs, still shouts dynamite when the crowd asks, still sharp, witty, and composed. But every time the microphone turns off, the lights dim, and the applause fades, he returns to a place no one else has the key to. A private world. No scandals, no intrusions, and no one there with him. And that, to many, is the most astonishing truth about Jimmie Walker's real life. A man who made the world burst into laughter. Yet no one has ever truly heard him laugh. The outsider in the kingdom of Hollywood. Jimmie Walker never tried to blend in with the crowd. He didn't need to. When all of Hollywood was rallying behind liberal movements, when artists spoke out for social justice and racial equality, when every word was carefully measured to avoid offending anyone, Jimmie Walker turned on the TV, looked into the camera, and said something that stunned the entire entertainment industry. "I agree with Donald Trump about 90% of the time." That statement came during a 2017 interview, at a time when countless black entertainers were denouncing Trump's administration for its harsh immigration policies, silence on police brutality, and racially charged remarks. Walker went the other way. No hesitation, no caution. A man who had once been a symbol of empowerment in a sitcom representing Black America now stood behind a president seen as the embodiment of division. Explaining his stance, Walker simply said, "I don't care about labels. I care about results." And I think he's practical in what he does. The remark instantly branded him a cultural traitor, especially among fellow black performers. In the comedy world, where laughter often carries hidden political messages, Walker was labeled out of touch, irrelevant, and provocative for survival. But he didn't stop. That same year, when comedian and host Bill Maher sparked outrage by saying the N-word on live television during a poorly judged joke, the entertainment industry moved to cancel him. Open letters circulated, petitions flooded in, and voices across Hollywood called the remark unforgivable. Jimmie Walker, one of the few black entertainers to defend Maher, said, "Instead, it was a joke. Please don't take everything so seriously. We're killing comedy with our sensitivity." It wasn't the first time he stirred controversy. In an interview with the Daily Beast, when asked about Bill Cosby's sexual assault scandal, the one that shattered the image of America's dad, Jimmie Walker replied, without pause, "I thought everybody already knew that." A simple statement, but one that hit like a punch to the glossy mask of show business. It implied something far darker that the entire industry had known and stayed silent for decades. Walker didn't react with outrage, nor did he defend anyone. He just dropped a cold truth as if to say, "You're shocked." Really? Comments like that gradually pushed him to the margins of talk shows and comedy circles. In a world where most actors strive to appear correct, Walker refused to play by the rules. And he was fine with that. "I don't talk to get applause," he said. "I talk because I believe what I'm saying. If someone's offended, that's their problem, not mine." At 70, Jimmie Walker no longer needed anyone's approval. He had no major studio contracts, no dependence on advertising or public image. All he had left was a microphone, a stage, and laughter. The one thing he had nurtured for decades. But behind each punchline, what he left audiences with wasn't comfort. It was a small, uneasy truth. Because he was never the kind of comedian who made people feel safe. He didn't soothe. He didn't flatter. He was the man who said what others didn't want to hear. And when you're a black entertainer who dares to support Trump, who laughs at taboo words, who says, "Cosby, I thought everyone knew," you're not just different, you're left behind. But maybe for Jimmie Walker, that no longer mattered, because he never needed the crowd to know he existed. What is the true treasure inside Jimmie Walker's mansion? Jimmie Walker's house looks nothing like what you'd expect from someone who was once a national phenomenon. No luxury cars, no gold-plated pools, no wine cellar or grand piano. From the outside, it's just a modest old-style home in California, quiet, tucked away from the main road, with no nameplate and no grand gates. But once you step through that wooden door, a different world appears. Not glamorous, not artificial, but a museum of memories. There's no safe filled with gold or jewels. Instead, a small box of concert tickets dating back to 1971. There's one from his first night performing in New York. Another faded from a Las Vegas show in 1985, 6 nights straight in a half-empty room. And others from state fairs where he performed for audiences of only a few dozen people who didn't know him as Jimmie, only as the Dynamite Guy. On the living room wall hang carefully framed black and white photos. One of him with Muhammad Ali, both laughing as Ali pretends to punch him in the gut. One with Johnny Carson, their hands on each other's shoulders after The Tonight Show. And one with Norman Lear, the man who brought him to national television, both gazing knowingly as if they understood they had created something that would outlast culture itself. But quieter still, in a drawer tucked away in the corner, there may be letters that were never sent. Letters to Esther Roll written after she passed, perhaps apologies, perhaps anger, perhaps just questions he carried for over 2 decades. Letters to John Amos, the man who played his father on screen, but left because of Jimmie's fame. Maybe saying, "I never wanted to take everything. I was just trying to survive." No one knows for sure, but if one day someone were to find those letters, the world would have to see him differently. In this house, no corner is meaningless. In the bedroom, on an old wooden shelf, are notebooks, not filled with jokes, not with scripts, but with personal notes, meticulous, detailed, as if he had no one to talk to, so he talked to the page. Some pages ask questions. Does anyone remember me? Beyond that shout, if I die today, would anyone come? Should I call Norman? One last time? No one answered those questions. But those pages are perhaps Jimmie Walker's greatest legacy, unedited truth, not the kind made for magazines or television. The truth of a man who once stood on top of the world, then quietly stepped down, kept walking, never begged, never complained, and never apologized for being himself. Maybe in the living room there's still that old CRT TV from the 90s, where he watches himself in Good Times, rewinding the part where he shouts "Dynamite" and chuckles softly, as if watching a stranger. Maybe on his desk sits the same microphone he once used to record his voice, not to perform, but just to hear himself. And maybe somewhere in a drawer, there are fan letters from 1975, handwritten, smudged with ink, from Black Americans across the country, who thanked him for making them believe they could be seen on television too, even if just for a laugh. Every corner of the house holds a layer of memory. Some corners make you smile at their simple beauty. Others make you go silent, heavy with solitude. Nothing in this home is fake. No feng shui decorations. No staging for show. Just one man living honestly, fully, privately. People often search celebrity mansions to find gold trophies or designer goods. But if anyone ever searched Jimmie Walker's home, they might not find great wealth. Yet they'd be forced to confront a harsher question. If you lost all your fame, would you still know who you are? For Jimmie Walker, the answer lies in those silent objects. And perhaps that is his true treasure. If you believe Esther Roll's story deserves to be remembered and celebrated, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more untold inspiring stories from Hollywood. Because great figures never live only in the spotlight. They live on in the memories of those who truly listen.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now during on screen.